Episode 1: The Nexus Awakens. The bell above the door of Anderson's books chimed softly, announcing the arrival of another customer into the quiet sanctuary of stories and dust motes dancing in afternoon sunlight. Jade Alexandra Anderson looked up from the stack of fantasy novels she was shelving, her wild cascade of red curls escaping from the loose bun she'd attempted that morning. She offered the elderly woman browsing the romance section a warm smile before returning to her task, carefully arranging the spines so they aligned perfectly. At 20 years old, Jade had worked at this bookstore for nearly 3 years, ever since she'd aged out of the foster care system. The shop, tucked away on a side street in downtown Portland, had become more than just a job. It was her refuge, her home, and her entire world. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had taken one look at the quiet girl with haunted eyes and offered her not just employment, but the small apartment above the shop for a price Jade could actually afford. "You know these books by heart, don't you?" Mrs. Chen's voice carried from the counter, warm with affection. The older woman adjusted her reading glasses, watching as Jade moved with practiced ease through the fantasy section. Jade laughed softly, tucking a rebellious curl behind her ear. "I've read most of them at least twice, some of them more times than I'd like to admit." "Nothing wrong with revisiting old friends," Mrs. Chen said, returning to the inventory list spread before her. "Sometimes the best adventures are the ones we return to again and again." Jade nodded, running her fingers along the spine of a worn copy of The Labyrinth. The familiar cover brought a smile to her face. As a child in the system, bouncing from one temporary home to another, books had been her only constant companions. While other kids had families and photo albums, Jade had stories. She'd escaped into worlds of magic and wonder, into tales of heroes who overcame impossible odds, of villains who found redemption, of love that transcended all boundaries. She dreamed of adventure, of being someone special, of finding a place where she truly belonged. But those were just fantasies. Real life had taught her that she was ordinary, forgettable, just another girl with no family and no past. The only remarkable thing about her was the strange birthmark on her left shoulder blade, a pattern of intersecting lines that almost looked like a constellation, though no doctor had ever been able to explain it. The afternoon wore on in comfortable routine. Jade helped customers find their next great read, organized the new arrivals, and lost herself in the peaceful rhythm of the bookstore. As closing time approached, Mrs. Chen gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. "I'm heading out early today, dear. Book club at the community center. You'll lock up?" "Of course," Jade assured her, already moving through her closing checklist in her mind. "Have fun, Mrs. Chen." "You should come sometime, you know. Meet some people your own age." Jade's smile was gentle but non-committal. She tried, once or twice, to connect with people her age, but conversations always seemed to hit walls. How do you explain a childhood spent in 12 different foster homes? How do you relate to people who had families, traditions, histories? It was easier to stay in her safe world of books and quiet solitude. After Mrs. Chen left, Jade moved through the shop, straightening displays and checking shelves. The setting sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. She was in the mythology section, reorganizing books on Norse legends, when something strange happened. Her hand brushed against the leather-bound volume of Norse myths, and suddenly, the world seemed to shift. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, Jade could have sworn she saw something. Not with her eyes, exactly, but with some other sense she didn't have words for. It was like looking at a reflection in a pond. But instead of one reflection, there were dozens, hundreds, infinite versions of the same scene rippling outward in every direction. She stumbled back, her heart racing, one hand pressed to her chest. The book fell from the shelf, landing with a heavy thud on the floor. Jade stared at it, breathing hard, waiting for something else to happen. But there was only silence and the familiar smell of old paper and binding glue. "I need sleep," she muttered to herself. bending to retrieve the book. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid it back into place. Too many late nights reading. But even as she tried to rationalize what had just happened, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The air itself seemed different, charged with a kind of potential that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Jade finished closing the shop on autopilot, her mind replaying that strange moment again and again. She locked the front door, counted the register, and climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, all while feeling like she was moving through a dream. Her apartment was small but cozy, filled with the accumulated treasures of a lifelong bibliophile. Bookshelves lined every wall, stacked too deep in places. A worn couch faced a small television that Jade rarely watched, preferring to spend her evenings reading. Posters from her favorite movies and shows decorated the walls. David Bowie as Jareth from Labyrinth, the Avengers in mid-battle, the Hogwarts castle at sunset, and many more. She made herself a simple dinner of pasta and marinara sauce, tried to watch a show on Netflix, and gave up after realizing she'd been staring at the screen for 20 minutes without processing a single word. Finally, she retreated to her bedroom, climbing into the comfortable nest of pillows and blankets she'd arranged on her bed. Sleep should have come easily. She was exhausted, but instead, Jade lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like she was on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. The birthmark on her shoulder blade began to tingle, a sensation she'd never experienced before. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was impossible to ignore. Like a low hum of energy running just beneath her skin. Jade rolled over, pulling her blanket up to her chin, and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with strange dreams. She dreamed of doorways opening in empty air, of countless worlds spinning like jewels on an infinite web, and of a voice, distant but growing closer, calling her name in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. When she woke the next morning, she would discover that nothing in her ordinary life would ever be the same again. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Jade Alexandra Anderson slept, unaware that destiny had already marked her as something far more than ordinary. Somewhere in the infinite sprawl of the multiverse, reality itself was beginning to take notice of the young woman with red curls and an untamable spirit. The Nexus was awakening. And soon, very soon, her true journey would begin. The next day started like any other. Jade's alarm went off at 7:30, pulling her from dreams that slipped away like water through her fingers. She showered, dressed in her usual uniform of jeans and a bookstore t-shirt, and wrestled her hair into submission. The birthmark on her shoulder blade no longer tingled, and in the harsh light of morning, the strange episode from the previous evening felt like nothing more than exhaustion and an overactive imagination. She made coffee in her small kitchen, strong and black, and carried it downstairs to open the shop. Mrs. Chen wouldn't arrive until 10, leaving Jade with the quiet morning hours she cherished most. These were the times when she could lose herself in organizing and creating displays, when the shop felt like it was truly hers. Jade unlocked the front door, flipped the sign to open, and breathed in the familiar scent of books. This was home. This was safety. This was real. She spent the first hour of the morning updating the window display, creating a themed arrangement around classic fantasy novels. As she worked, carefully positioning copies of The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, and A Wizard of Earthsea, she felt herself relax. Whatever had happened yesterday was just a fluke, a trick of the light, nothing more. The bell chimed, announcing the first customer of the day. A young man with sandy brown hair entered, looking around with a slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who didn't frequent bookstores often. Jade offered him a friendly smile. "Good morning. Can I help you find anything?" Yeah, actually," he said, approaching the counter. "I'm looking for something for my girlfriend. She's really into, magic stuff. Witches and spells and that kind of thing." Jade's smile widened. This was her element. Fiction or nonfiction? Fiction, definitely. She just likes the stories. Follow me, Jade said, leading him toward the fantasy section. As she walked, she began pulling books from the shelves with practiced ease. If she likes witch stories, she'd probably enjoy Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. It's about a family of witches dealing with a curse. Or if she wants something darker, there's The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. That one's quite long but absolutely immersive. The young man looked impressed. You really know your stuff. I've read most of what's in here, Jade admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I'm Jade, by the way. I practically live here. I can tell, he said with a grin. In a good way. Thanks for the recommendations. She rang up his purchase, wrapped the books carefully, and sent him on his way with the warm feeling of having connected someone with a story they'd love. These were the moments that made the job worthwhile, the small interactions that proved books could still bring people together. The morning continued in much the same way. Customers came and went. Jade helped a retired teacher find a mystery novel, pointed a college student toward the philosophy section, and spent 20 minutes discussing the merits of various science fiction series with an enthusiastic teenager who reminded Jade of herself at that age. It was nearly noon when things took a turn toward the strange once again. Jade was alone in the shop, Mrs. Chen having stepped out for lunch, when a man entered who immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. There was nothing overtly threatening about him. He was middle-aged, dressed in an expensive suit, with dark hair graying at the temples. But something about the way he moved, the intensity of his gaze as he scanned the shop, made Jade's instincts scream danger. He approached the counter with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good afternoon. I'm looking for something quite specific. I'll do my best to help, Jade said, keeping her voice professionally pleasant while every nerve in her body told her to run. What are you looking for? Information, he said simply, about Nexus points. Multiversal convergence. The kind of knowledge that isn't found in ordinary books. Jade's heart began to race, though she had no idea why those words affected her so strongly. I'm not sure I understand. Are you looking for science fiction? We have a good selection of books about parallel universes and... I'm not looking for fiction, Miss Anderson. The use of her name when she hadn't given it made her blood run cold. The man leaned forward, his smile widening. I'm looking for you. Before Jade could react, before she could scream or run or do anything, the man's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The moment his skin touched hers, pain exploded through her body. It felt like lightning was coursing through her veins, like every cell in her body was being torn apart and reassembled. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Jade stumbled backward, breaking free of his grip, and something impossible happened. The world fractured. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope made of reality itself. Jade could see the bookstore, her bookstore, but she could also see a dozen other versions of it. In one, the shop was abandoned and covered in dust. In another, it was burning. In a third, it didn't exist at all, replaced by a modern office building. The images overlapped and merged, all existing simultaneously, all equally real. And beyond the bookstore, she could see more. Infinite doors opening in the fabric of space itself, each one leading to a different world. She saw a golden city floating in the clouds, a labyrinth of stone walls and impossible staircases, a castle surrounded by snow, a gleaming spaceship against a backdrop of stars. The man who had grabbed her was staring at her with a mixture of triumph and greed. There it is, he breathed. The Nexus awakens. Do you have any idea how valuable you are? How many people would kill to possess your power? Jade couldn't answer. She couldn't breathe. The visions were overwhelming, threatening to drown her in the infinite possibilities of existence. She fell to her knees, her hands pressed to her temples, trying desperately to shut it all out. Stop, she whispered. Please, make it stop. And just like that, it did. The visions collapsed inward, folding back into a single, solid reality. The bookstore was just a bookstore again. The doors to other worlds vanished. Jade was left gasping on the floor, tears streaming down her face, while the stranger loomed over her. "Impressive," he said, pulling out what looked like a high-tech device from his jacket. "Your instincts are already kicking in. But don't worry, we'll help you control that power. My employers have very specific plans for you." He reached for her again, but this time, Jade was ready. Without thinking, without knowing how she knew, she thrust her hand forward and felt something inside her respond. Energy poured out of her, raw and uncontrolled, and a doorway tore itself open in the middle of the bookstore. The stranger stumbled backward with a curse as wind howled through the portal. Jade could see something on the other side, a swirling vortex of colors and lights that looked like the birth of a universe. "You don't know what you're doing," the man shouted over the roar of the wind. "You'll tear a hole in reality." But Jade wasn't listening. She was focused on a single thought, a desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would help her. The birthmark on her shoulder blade blazed with heat, and the portal began to change. Instead of a chaotic vortex, it stabilized, showing the interior of what looked like a grand library. And standing in that library, looking directly at her through the impossible doorway, was a tall man in an elegant black suit with wild blonde hair and mismatched eyes. He smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be entirely human, and extended his hand toward her. "Well, well," said Jareth, the Goblin King, his voice carrying clearly across the space between worlds. "It seems destiny has finally decided to introduce us. Do you need assistance, precious thing?" Jade didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, reaching for his outstretched hand, leaving behind the stranger and the only life she'd ever known. Her fingers closed around his, and she felt a jolt of recognition so profound it shook her to her core. This was right. This was real. This was the beginning of everything. Shareth pulled her through the portal with surprising gentleness, and the moment she crossed the threshold, the doorway slammed shut behind her, cutting off the bookstore and the world she knew. Jade collapsed on what felt like marble flooring, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and shock. Strong hands helped her sit up, and she found herself looking into those incredible mismatched eyes, one blue and one dark as night. "There now," Jareth said softly, his voice like music and danger combined. "You're safe. Welcome to the labyrinth, my dear Nexus. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Jade opened her mouth to respond, to ask the thousands of questions racing through her mind, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Jareth's face, concerned and curious as he caught her before she could fall. The Nexus had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again. Episode 2. Episode 2. Episode 2. The Seven Stars Align. Jade woke to the scent of ancient stone and